Hey guys, it's Miss Burton. I'm here to show some more Tangle patterns and then another Tangle doodle. So again, I'm using white paper. I am using a Uniball Vision waterproof, fade-proof black ink pen. Any black ink pen will do, or whatever you have. And I have a graphite pencil, and for me, I'm using a 2B because it's a little bit extra soft compared to a number 2, but a number 2 regular old everyday pencil is just fine for these purposes. I'm hardly going to use any graphite. The graphite comes at the end. I'm never going to outline my pattern in graphite and then trace it. That's just not the idea here. So remind ourselves to check our posture, take some slow deep breaths to prepare ourselves. And I would do a few of those, but for the sake of time, I'm going to move on. So today I'm going to do two what we call organic shape-based patterns. Organic are the idea of things that we might find in nature that are not exact. And then one that's a little more, at least starting with geometric shapes. So things that you might measure that might be more exact. All right. So the first one I'm going to start with, I'm just going to do some simple kind of snaky looking shapes with a little kind of a top at the up in the top, and give them a little bit of space. Just going to do maybe 3 coming down from the top to start and vary their lengths. And ideally, I would not be picking up my pen there. Okay, so I've kind of broken up my space here. And what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to start making little ovals that are concentric. Concentric meaning they're with the center, they're sharing the center. And notice that I'm kind of trying to make a smooth motion and come back just on the opposite of this shape here, as though I have a complete oval that's going behind. So I'm just repeating this, and I'm going to check my posture and breathing. Try not to hurry it. I'm going to do 3 or 4 of those. If it's getting sloppy, you probably want to just slow down and check your breathing and your posture. Okay, now I might want to vary the way that these are angled, although I noticed that the top edges I made the same direction. So I guess with these, I'm just going to follow the direction of that top edge. And then as I continue, as I create more of these, I can alter the direction so they're not all facing the same way. Okay, and I can decide to stop after 3 of those, 4 of those. Breathe in. When I'm at home today, I'm hearing neighbors outside, I'm hearing traffic, I'm hearing the fountain on my patio, and it's okay. This one feels more like I'm spiraling in the background. And it's all right. Okay, so I can go in and I can bring in more of these shapes. I can bring them from the side or however I choose. But just thinking about where I still have space. So I mentioned before that I would want to change the kind of the direction of the top there. As I draw one, I can go in and put an oval around it. And breathe. Okay, and decide how far you want to go. I can go further if I want. A repetition of that shape is what makes it a pattern. I notice that I'm still having blank spaces, although some of these are starting to touch. So I can think about how I would want to kind of fill in these spaces. And I noticed I started holding my breath, so I'm going to consciously take deep breaths. Now I'm going to decide to make this one go a little bit bigger. And as I start to fill in these spaces, my lines are going to bump up against each other. I'm just going to think about how would that go if I pick up the tip of my pen. Okay, and I can keep going until I fill in the entire space, or I can stop early. It's still a pattern, even if you don't fill in the entire space. So how you use these patterns is up to you. But traditionally, they are done in black and white with a mid-tone gray, and fill in sections on a finished tangle. All right, so I could even just do a little one down here. Do another one down here. So you decide how you want to fill in this space, what looks good to you. This one's coming around behind, or it appears to be coming around behind. Okay, I think that's kind of fun. And I could have another one that comes up here in this space. I could continue that line down here if I wanted. I seem to keep facing them in that same direction. And mine seem to be spiraling, and again, that's okay. So it's all about that repetition that can be really relaxing and gets your hand to be doing a repeated movement, kind of a little dance. So as you are picking up the tip of your pen as you're bumping into sections that you created earlier, it can give the illusion of depth that some of these are in the background and some of these are in the front or the foreground. And later we can use graphite to bring in some shading that will add to that effect. Okay, and remember to watch your self-talk. Watch the thoughts that come into your head as you're drawing. Are you saying mean things to yourself? Are you being your own bully? I don't think you need that. I don't think you need to welcome that into this experience. So if you find your inner voice going negative or judgmental, remind yourself that you are in this for enjoyment. You are not in this for abuse. And those types of thoughts aren't welcome. Same goes for if you have actual other people who have decided that it's somehow okay. I'm just going to fill this one a little more. That it's somehow okay to put you down at this time. And it's just not. All right. I think I'm going to do one more in this section. And I'm just going to let you recognize that this is how this pattern goes. And you can make it feel like this same section is coming up through these concentric oval kind of shapes. And again, when we're dealing with organic shapes, we don't want to have any idea that there is even such a thing as perfection in this situation, because with organic shapes, unevenness really adds to the feeling that this is something found in nature. All right, so I'm going to leave that one. The next one that I'm going to do is based on that kind of curved checkerboard that we've done in the past. So I'm just going to let the curve of my wrist help me in this. I'm not going to worry about perfection and straightness. I'm going to try for even spacing of my curved lines, but I can already predict right now that that's not going to be perfect in any way, shape, or form, and then that's perfectly fine. So I'm going to check my posture because I often kind of collapse as I'm working. I notice students putting their faces closer and closer to their paper. So just be aware if that's happening to you and breathe in and fill your lungs up and try to sit up nice and tall. So I'm going to breathe in, relax my hold on my pen, and draw on the exhale. There's a bit of a curve there. I'm just pulling my hand down and drawing the air first. I probably want to give myself a good amount of space between these, maybe a centimeter, something like that. If they're too close, it's going to be hard to put in the details of the pattern that we're going to have today. Got a little bumpy on the end there, so I'm just going to watch my breathing. And part of it also is where my wrist is resting. Okay, so that focused practice that's reflective when we notice that we're having an issue, something's happening that we hadn't planned and maybe don't want to welcome. Just think about what happened at that time to create that situation and how could you remedy that or fix it the next time. But we don't need to worry about fixing something that we've already done. Okay, what we have is just fine. Okay, so I'm just going to turn my paper and decide where to start. Make sure that my hand is comfortable. Check my breathing. Okay. I find it helpful to practice in the air just above my paper before I do my actual mark on the paper. Helps me to make sure that I positioned my hand in the right place to start. Got some loud traffic today, and that's okay. I'm enjoying not being in a car, not having to worry about traffic. Okay, so I set out my basic grid pattern. It kind of looks like a net. It's a butterfly net or a fishing net, but I wouldn't want to harm any animals. No animals will be harmed in this process today. All right, so we have the basic setup, and we're now going to go with curves. And these are big curves, so it's a big movement of my wrist. So I'm going to go into smaller curves. So it's just going to be a tighter movement to the wrist. And I'm just kind of bringing my pen in closer to the wrist as I do that. I'm going to be doing a repeated pattern, so it's that kind of dance, and it's going to be a little bit bouncy. So I'm going to start in this section right here, and I'm just going to connect this mark here, or excuse me, this corner to this corner, and I don't want to get anywhere near the center. So it's just going to be just a little bit up, and I'm going to repeat that. And I can't quite get to where that corner would be. I can go back this way and aim toward that corner. So same thing here. And this would go up here. This would go up here and here. Starts to feel like quilting in a down comforter or a polyfill comforter if you want a vegan version. Talking about not harming animals. If we can reduce our violence in our thoughts to not harm others, then we can make it easier to not want to harm ourselves. That may sound strange. It may seem obvious to not harm ourselves. But that negative self-talk that we keep discussing is very real. It happens to all of us. And it is a very real form of self-harm. So I invite you to just be mindful, to be aware, to notice anytime you have a bullying negative thought that comes into your head. It could be about this process. It could be about something else. Okay, recognize it. Okay, recognize that it's not welcome. So I'm going to continue this on all of these single lines. So I'm just going to rotate my paper about 90 degrees so that it's comfortable for me. So I'm continuing the same thing. I'm not turning my hand around to get the different sections. I'm turning my paper around to make it easier for myself. So again, check my posture and breathing. And we're looking for a repeated movement that's about the same size. So if it starts to get really big or really small and becomes different from the marks that you've already made, then you can just take a quick break, evaluate, think about why is this happening? Do you have a change in your breathing? Are you feeling anxious about something? Are you in a hurry? Are you able to slow down? Or do you need to come back to this later when you're able to focus? And I notice I'm picking up my pen. I'm going to remind myself to try and keep it as one continual line as much as I can. Okay, if you ever find that I'm demonstrating a pattern that you just don't feel comfortable with yet, and you need to practice your small hand movements, give yourself permission to not do this one right now. But I encourage you to also be brave and bold and try things. You may surprise yourself. In fact, I bet you will. Okay, so I'm just doing the visual check to make sure I got all of those. Now, this can be a pattern by itself. So if you're happy at this point, you're welcome to stay with that. I'm going to go fancier. I like fancy. So now my lines are curved, what we would call concave. They're coming down towards me, but I'm still going to have lines that curve upward. I always have to remind myself about posture and breathing. One more rotation. All right, so I'm going to double check that you do not have any single line that's just by itself. It should be kind of wrapped up. It might look like a floral pattern to you. It might look like a quilting pattern to you. It might look like some kind of embroidery, something made out of thread. It might just be an abstract pattern that doesn't seem to represent anything at all. What we're going to look for now is what we call the negative space, or the in-between space that's left over inside the pattern. And I see this, what looks like a kind of started out as a rectangle and collapsed in on itself. So I'm just going to echo that shape, okay, inside. And similar spacing to what I already had. Just going to draw kind of a pillow looking shape on the inside that we could describe as being an aura, or a line that kind of follows the exact shape that we already have with some spacing. Okay, I'm going to pause there and allow myself to not fill in the entire page. We get the basic idea. Okay, and the last one that I'm going to do today is what is inspired by patterns from Japanese kimonos. Okay, so I'm just going to start kind of up here, and I'm going to start with a small circle, and I'm going to do 6 little lines that come off. Okay, and from there I'm going to do kind of an echo or an aura line that wraps around these shapes and then comes in. And then I've kind of not given myself quite as much space as I need to do the entire pattern, but I'll repeat it again down below. I'm going to go into the in-between sections, and I'm going to curve out. I'm going to curve in, and then I'm going to curve back into that indentation. Okay, so I'm going to repeat that. This one's going to go off the page, and I can feel where it would go. and then bring it in. And if it bumps into this section here, then that's what it does. And do this one, it would come off here and into that section. This one I can draw it in the air so I can feel where it would be. And I'll let this one go a little bit wider and like that. All right, so I'm going to do another one over here, starting with a little circle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And try to make them approximately evenly spaced. Okay, again, perfection is not something that we're going for here. So I see what I'm doing is I've got 5 kind of petal shapes around a center that has 6. So it doesn't make perfect mathematical sense, and that's okay. I'm going to kind of curve this out and then back in. So I want 5 of these. It can be tempting to want to correct yourself and draw this in graphite, and I'm going to encourage you not to do that, not to give in to the part of your brain that's striving for perfectionism. Just go for excellence at this point, or your best. So I can do this one the same size and have the sections appear to go behind as they would bump into the patterns that I've already done. So this is different from this pattern very much in that these don't have to have any particular spacing in relation to one another. So the repetition is the repetition of the different sections. Okay, so you're getting that repeated movement. Okay, and again, I can draw that behind to feel like where would that go? Okay, and there's my next one. And you'll notice that I haven't added graphite to any of these patterns yet, and that's okay. I can go back and do that if I'd like at the end. You do not have to add graphite to any of your patterns. I like how it can bring in the feeling of depth on a flat surface. I love a good illusion of 3 dimensions. And just picking up your pen when you bump into your next section that's close to the one that you're drawing can add to that illusion of 3 dimensions. Okay, so you could continue this as much as you want. You can fill in the entire space if you want to. And eventually you're just going to end up with mostly sections that are kind of outside the space that we have. So I'm going to stop there. So let's back out for a minute and think about how could we add graphite to the patterns that we've been working on. So if I go into this one, if I want to increase the feeling of depth, if I want to make it really feel like some of these sections are forward and some are behind, what I can look for is which sections do I see the entire thing. So this one I drew was one of my first ones, and I see the entire thing. Nothing seems to be in front of it. So I can just do a little shadow around it where it's passing in front of my other objects. And I can make it seem like it's blocking light. Now I could do that with this kind of stem section if I want. I don't have to. So this one here seems to be in front of that one. So I could add a shadow there if I have light coming in from this direction. This one seems to be in front of that one. So I can add a little shadow, and I can do that for each one of these. So anywhere where you would be blocking light by being forward in order, you can add that. Okay, and since I didn't fill in this whole section there, I just don't have that many spaces where it would make sense to add shading. And you can leave it like that. And I can see that that already brings in a feeling of depth, or you can smudge it a little bit. Okay, with this pattern here, I could choose certain parts to shade in. So I kind of like shading in this middle section. There's just so many bits of line here. So increasing your contrast, having difference in value from some of your shapes to others can really make the variation in your pattern stand out. Can draw attention. Just make it more interesting looking, in my opinion. Notice again, I do not have an eraser because there are no mistakes that any of us are making today. If something happens that we didn't expect, I encourage you to just go with it, keep working with it, work around it. Recognize that this is something that happens in our own lives all the time, and how we respond to the unexpected can have a huge impact on the quality of our life. We can spend a lot of our time kind of beating ourselves up over what if I had done something different in that case, and wishing that we could go back and change things and travel through time. And it's just not helpful. Okay. So with this particular pattern, there's a lot of white space. So notice that I've got a real variation in value from this middle pattern compared to this pattern here. Okay, so I can think of, if this is an actual flower, which these look like, then this section here is in front of this section here. So I could do a little shading around the outside of this if I like. I could shade this shape a little bit. And again, it helps to have a dull tip. If you have a really sharp tip, it's going to be a little more difficult. And you can do a little shading around the end here. You can always choose however you want to shade something. Okay, these are just some suggestions from books that I'm using. Okay, and again, if you have something that appears to go in front, you could put a little shadow underneath that. Okay, so maybe there's a little shadow under here. Here at the tips. And it's easier with the side of your pencil. You're just going to have more surface area touching your paper. And imperfection is fine. Okay, because again, we're working with organic shapes. Imperfection and natural variation is expected. A little shadow underneath this one. A little shadow here. A little shadow here. Okay, a little shadow on the tip. Okay. Now, if you feel a little uncomfortable with this much white space in the background, again, you can continue filling in more with this pattern, but an option that you could certainly have would be to fill in the background extra dark. Some people will just fill in the background completely, or they might add another pattern, small circles or stripes, or another pattern that they like that is quite different. People will often use other patterns to fill in the negative spaces when they have a pattern that has a lot of those gaps. And that is entirely your choice. As the artist, you get to make these choices about your work. Okay, so you can see how that could make this pattern feel like it's coming forward, because our brain likes to tell us that darker values are receding or moving towards the back, and lighter values are coming towards the viewer. Even though this is all just on a flat surface. So I'm not going to shade in the whole thing, just a little bit to give you the idea of how that level of contrast might look. And as with so many patterns, it's kind of hypnotic. It's tempting to just spend all day completing a pattern, filling in a background, and if you have that kind of time, then there's nothing wrong with choosing to do that. So I'm going to just go ahead and let that be as it is. And there we have 3 patterns. 1, 2, and 3.